the heroic path is laid out in as a meta path by religious systems, basically, as the road to redemption. And the redemption is redemption from chaos, but also from tyranny. It's redemption from both. And in the transcendent space that those meta stories exist, that's a divine archetype, right? It's the successful hero. But then that's an archetype. So, let's say you're doing everything right, and then your family gets killed in a car accident, and you slip and fall down the stairs, and you have a concussion, and maybe you wake up and your brain damaged. And then while you're recovering, you get hit by some other illness, because that often, a 1-2 punch like that will often really hurt people, because they're just getting up, they're quite fragile, and they're pretty hurt, and then something else comes along and whacks them. And, it isn't the case that identification with the archetypal hero will stop those things from happening. Because there's an element of randomness in life. So you have to be sensible about it. You have to say, it's your best bet, which is a different thing. It's no certain path, but given the range of potential negative outcomes, voluntary confrontation with emergent anomaly, roughly speaking, gives you the best poker hand. Or maybe makes you the best poker player. That would be a better way of thinking about it. Now, so people can be traumatized by failure to update their models, because then the model gets old, like Osiris, and it's unable to see the tyranny, plus it's archaic and can just get wiped out because it no longer is adapted to the situation. It's like, you would be like that if you were still using DOS as an operating system. Well, it's a perfectly reasonable operating system, but it used to really work. But all you had to do was not update and you'd be extinct, right? One of the things Mircea Eliade pointed out was that one of the processes that's sort of universally regarded as a sin, insofar as that's a universal conception, so you might think about it as a meta-error, is speeding along the process of inevitable decay through willful blindness. So things will decay of their own accord, so you have to be awake just to keep the bloody thing alive, but you can speed the rate at which it decays by pretending that nothing's wrong and refusing to change anything at all. And so then you say, well, not only does it decay, but your blindness is contributing to the decay. And that's, well, in one of the stories we're going to talk about today, which is the flood story, that's basically the underlying story of the flood. Is like, God's pretty irritated that everybody's blind and stupid, but he's particularly irritated that they stay blind and stupid. And so the consequence of that is everything gets washed away. And that actually is the consequence of that. So when the ancient Hebrews were imagining that story, when modern people look at that story, they think, well, what kind of God would do that? It's like, well, we talked about New Orleans. Why did New Orleans get washed away? Well, one answer is hurricane. That's a good answer, but the other answer is maybe they should have made the dikes stronger like they knew for the last 100 years. And maybe all the money that was supposed to be spent on the dikes shouldn't have got diverted into the pockets of corrupt politicians. And so then you say, well, why did New Orleans get flooded? Hurricane? Or the sins of man and the tendency of things to decay? Well, the truth is that they're both equally potent causal elements. When your city collapses because your engineers have built the concrete with sand, which happens all over the world, right? Like, especially in corrupt countries where they don't make the concrete properly because it's cheaper just to fill it with sand. The whole bloody city falls over. It's like, is that the earthquake? Well, yes, because it wouldn't have happened without the earthquake. But it also wouldn't have happened if people weren't corrupt. So, and there's a constant, that's the dynamic between the terrible mother, chaos, and the terrible father. And the other dynamic there is also the adversarial element of the individual. You can't assess the situation without taking those three causal forces into consideration simultaneously. Someone just gave me a paper a couple of weeks ago linking corruption to poverty. Now, I knew that for a long time, because if you look at the list of, if you look at countries and rank them by GDP, and then look at their corruption indexes, it's like there's a tremendously high correlation. And you might say, well, poverty causes corruption. But really, that's what you're going to say. You're going to say that poor people are corrupt. Really? No, I wouldn't do that. First of all, there's lots of poor people who aren't corrupt. But corrupt people are poor. You can bloody well be sure of that. So,
should we expect a dip after Russia killed the opposition then?
a dip?
A GDP hit, yeah, dip, whatever.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the ruble is falling like mad. You know, and there's a variety of causes of that. But Russia is corrupt beyond belief. You know, so, and corruption is like inertia. You know, if you and I have a transaction, and we both stick to what we say, I hardly even have to think about you. You know, you're a sentence on a page. What a good deal. But if you're not that, God only knows, you might wipe me out because I'm trading with you. You know, I mean, I've had business dealings with people. Some people I don't even have a contract with. We just say what's going to happen, and that happens. And for years, you know. And then other people, it's like detailed contracts. They take really 6 months of work to lay out, and they're violated continually, and it turns into just an absolute catastrophe. And so the cost of that is exceptionally high. You can't have a transaction that can be profitable, roughly speaking, in the presence of corruption, because the transaction cost is too high. And so it just spirals into poverty. You spend all your time trying to figure out what the hell the other person is up to, instead of, you know, concentrating on what you could actually do. So I think the only real natural resource is honesty. You know, and you might think, well, that's, you know, what's your evidence for that? It's like, that's not a problem. In stable democratic countries, the best predictor of long-term success is intelligence and conscientiousness. It's like, isn't that an index of the integrity of the system? I mean, I don't see how you can argue that any other way. Conscientious people are diligent, dutiful, and honest. They do what they say they're going to do. And smart people are faster. So basically what the data reveal is that if you're fast, well, you're going to get there faster than other people because you're fast. And then if you're fast and honest, the probability that you're going to move up your dominance hierarchy is massively, massively increased. You know, the over RR is probably about 0.6 relationship between IQ and conscientiousness. But a lot of that's measurement error. You know, because I can't figure out how conscientious you are with a questionnaire. There's going to be a lot of measurement error there. There's less measurement error with IQ. But then the performance indexes are also full of measurement error. Right, because it isn't easy for me to tell how well you're doing. I could use estimates, your income, self-reports of how you're doing, peer ratings of how you're doing, your supervisor's ratings of how you're doing, your subordinates' ratings of how you're doing, how much money you make if you're a salesman or someone who has a direct income. But that only captures, you know, maybe that captures 60% of your success or something. And if that's the case, then the R for the measurement of your success is only about 0.75. And so if the measurement error for IQ and conscientiousness tops out at about 0.7, which is probable, and the performance index accuracy tops out at about 0.7, a correlation of 0.5 is like, it's not 35% of the variance. It's like 70% of the measurable variance. So, you know, and I can't think of a counter-explanation for that. Now, if you look in creative domains, you have to use openness, and you have to use different measures, because creative people are, it's not easy to assess the performance of creative people. If it was, they wouldn't be creative, because the problem with creative people is they keep mucking with the structure that you would use to assess them. You know, so you couldn't assess Picasso as an impressionist. That just isn't going to work. So it's very hard for people to think about what to do with someone like Picasso, because he demands that you come up with a whole new rating scheme. And that's, you know, that's the real problem with creative people.